So I promise you to show a little bit about Radius and LDAP authentication. So a short introduction on this. Well, first of all, I'm going to point you to a white paper again. So there is an excellent configuration guide from Cisco, UCS LDAP Active Directory, I think. This is the one. It's stated under the configuration examples section. Dankjewel. Thanks. This is going to show you exactly how you can configure your Active Directory server and how to configure the UCS for LDAP integration. It's going to show you an excellent way in how to do this. I actually use this guide over and over again when configuring this. By the way, when you walk into the lab, there are a couple of things that they need to give you. So let me go over LDAP configuration. Come on. So if I take one of our mock labs, for example, and I go to the LDAP integration mock lab, so our mock labs test you on this. There has to be, in the lab, there has to be something like this. So they should tell you exactly what is the IP address of the domain controller, what is the bind DN, what is the base DN, what is the filter, and what is the password. They should tell you this. Otherwise, you cannot do LDAP integration. Now, what they can mess with you, so this is basically just copy-paste, right? The bind user is just a copy-paste here. The base DN is a copy-paste. The filter is actually the only thing that you should remember, but they give you that as well. They tell you the password of the bind user and the IP address of the Active Directory server. So let's follow this mock lab as soon as I can log into my. So for some reason my remote desktop is busy. So let me get the Active Directory server here and log into UCS Manager because my other host is not working well. Now let's hope that they install Java here. Doesn't seem to be. No, Java is uninstalled. Oh man. Ah, there we go, fortunately. So, LDAP integration in UCS. We go into our LDAP authentication. Let me go out of the way here. Into our LDAP stuff. So we need to configure 3 things. You always need these 3 things to get a working configuration. So I start with the LDAP provider because that means the LDAP server. Now just follow our list here. What is the IP address? Copy and paste. What is the bind DN? Copy and paste. You should be able to copy and paste this in the lab as well because they give everything digital. The base DN, run that as well. The filter, like I said, they give you this in the lab as well. The password, and click next. Group authorization and group recursion, both should be enabled. And again, if you follow this, if you follow the guide, it says you exactly here what is the bind DN, what is the base DN. The filter should be account name is $user ID. Group recursion, click enable, click the recursive recursion. So it's not very difficult, just follow a couple of rules and finish. So that is my Active Directory server. Then to get my system to use this Active Directory server, I need to enable the authentication of LDAP. That's what I first do with a provider group. Meaning in a provider group, I say LDAP provider group. I'm just going to put like the Radius server configuration on iOS. I just move this server into the group because this group I'm going to use when enabling the authentication. Then in the authentication section, I have two things. I have native authentication and domains. The difference is native authentication means logging in with just specifying the username and the password. So when you just click Launch UCS Manager, the native authentication as specified here is just that username password authentication where I do not select anything else. Now, there is an option to select something else, and that is called an authentication domain. If I create one and I call it Active Directory, give it a name, then I select I want to authenticate using LDAP, which provider group? PG. Then after I click OK, what this is going to do, when I take my Launch UCS Manager button now and I say Launch the Manager, when I get my login window, and this has to do with Java caching and stuff, so I had a lot of issues with this, that as soon as you configure those domains, like still it's not available here. What it should say here, but this has to do with Java cache and stuff, is a drop-down box saying select default authentication or select something that I configure. So that Active Directory keyword that I configured, that should be in here. That should be stated here as a drop-down box. But this has to do with Java issues and all kinds of stuff that you don't have any influence on. But that is what the domain is doing. So it creates that drop-down box when logging in to select either the default authentication or something else. And that means if I select that something else, then I get to configure, then I get to log in using Active Directory. They will never ask you to change the native authentication, because then if you misconfigure the LDAP stuff, you will lock yourself out of the UCS. So they will not ask you to do that. It will probably be just configuring a different domain so that you can check the Active Directory authentication. Now, one more thing that you need to do here is a group map. Because what this will do is this will map a certain LDAP user group, right? So if you're placing users in Active Directory, then I'm going to map that to certain roles. So it's probably going to specify you in the lab with that the group domain admins need to map to the admin role, that the storage admins need to map to the storage role. So this is to map the role inside the UCS. But this means that I'm going to map some user groups to some roles inside UCS. So I'm going to take the server admin group and map that to things that you can do on the servers. So server roles. Now I'm not done with this, because server admins is not the exact group DN, right? So it's just a keyword called server admins. The group DN is much more. So what that says here is the value should exactly match with how it is configured in Active Directory. What this basically means is take your base DN, right? copy that in here, and say CN is server admin, so the group name, and then type that base DN behind it. This is your group map, and a lot of people forget that and they just type in server admins and think they're done. Now this should be the exact group DN, which is just the CN is name, comma, and then put the base DN that is already given to you here, put that behind it. But pay attention, this should be an LDAP path, not just the name of the group. That is the biggest mistake that people make here. Because the rest is given to you, so you cannot make a mistake there, but this is where you can make mistakes. And that's LDAP integration.